People are talking about QBRs, BCIO with almost no strategy.
Chris Day, welcome to the MSP Insider. Your work of building integrated platforms has really transformed how top MSPs deliver value.
There's been a true lack of focus on the last mile, making sure we deliver beautiful experiences to our customers, because that's what makes lasting, unbreakable partnerships. The way we approached that problem was, I think, totally different. And there's folks doing it really well for some customers, but there's almost nobody that's doing it really well for all customers. The industry's been somewhat plagued by solving for the MSP. Where I think the industry needs to pivot is, call it being lazy. We don't want our different product managers to have to get together and envision how they could have integrations between them. And so we basically remove all the shackles. We call that the fruits of that labor are going to become evident here in 2025. The innovation that we can deliver is going to be accelerating at a ridiculous rate. Setting client goals, what's a system of record for those goals? There's no good answer for that today. What can AI do to supplement what the SMB is doing? I think MSPs are really equipped to assist with that. A lot of things with generative AI that just make a ton of sense, GPT and Grok and everything else. The one that I think is more complicated, true machine learning, understanding, and memory, we see big opportunity. Honestly, if you could interact with an agent, that agent could solve your problems faster, very accurately, you'd be happy to do that. But until that's true, then...
Chris Day, welcome to the MSP Insider. Now, your work of building integrated platforms has really transformed how top MSPs deliver value to their clients. And today, what I want to do is explore really the hidden framework behind like a truly integrated MSP platform and why most providers get it completely wrong. But before we dive into any of that, the structure for the show has to stay true. And the previous guest left a question behind for you to answer. And the question for you comes from Colin Knox. And his question is, what is your top regret over the last 10 years in business? The thing that you knew you should have done, but didn't do?
That's a really interesting question. An unscripted answer too. So great question, Colin. My perspective in the last 10 years, what was the one thing that I didn't do or wish I'd done?
Yeah, like what was the one thing that you knew you should have done, but you didn't do?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a nuanced question. I think there's lots of lots of things that I did, and I feel like I made the right decision.
Yeah.
There's a few, maybe on the unhinged side of things, um, selling a company a little too soon is probably something that I don't have a regret over, and we
Sure.
could read between the lines which company that might have been.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I have regret over it. It was a decision that was made for the family and for my future and all that. And actually was a decision that unlocked everything that I'm doing now. So
Yeah.
for that reason, can't have regrets. But
Yeah.
you can't help but wonder if you stick around a little bit longer with something,
Yeah.
was there a bigger opportunity that I left on the table? So that's how I would probably answer that. So I feel like maybe preempting the sale of a company when it could have been something else and it could have had a much bigger future.
Yeah.
So is that a good answer?
Yeah, it is. I think, being on the founder's journey myself now, I can sort of future pace a bit to say, or to see, like, there's probably just an element of odd nuance to having your thing not outlive you, but like continue on when you're not a part of it too, where there would always sort of be a little bit of that open loop of like, what if, or what about, or what about this? But to your other point, like it can also really be a high leverage to go do some of the other things that you've continued on doing. So I could see how
Totally.
that wouldn't be, a regret, but you're still in the visionary mode of your vision for that entity.
Yeah, and it's possible that you would have a different regret if you made a different choice
Yeah,
then too.
sure.
So you never
Right.
know, right? That's
Yeah.
life is complicated, and I
Yeah.
guess I feel fortunate to have been able to not have that be my last hurrah in the MSP industry by a long shot. So
Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty good about the decision now.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about that too, more because I think it leans into maybe your origin story a little.
Yeah.
Is, tell me about the moment that you realized traditional MSP tools were fundamentally disconnected? Like, how did you
Yeah.
start there?
Yeah, if I think back to, like let's call it like 2009 or something like that,
Yeah.
when I was really active in
Hmm.
the MSP space.
Hmm.
Um, a time when PSA and RMM were very innovative
Yeah.
at the time, and people were rapidly adopting, and the growth rates were enormous in those platforms. Um, my story kind of came into play with what I found was a blue ocean category,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what obviously documentation was at that time. And if
Yeah.
I think back to that category creation,
Hmm.
um, that it's a hard road to travel,
Yeah.
because you're out there, and at that time the perception was that documentation already exists
Mm.
now, so why
Yeah.
would I need something like this?
Yeah.
It's already, I've got three different places where I've got documentation. And so I think it takes a bit of courage to launch something that's a new category,
Hmm.
and it can be slower, and it's very educational, and having to get in
Yeah.
front of people and tell your story at scale.
Hmm.
But it's funny because that kind of became my mindset for all things.
Yeah.
And I think you and I have discussed that in the past, where it's
Hmm.
like, you got to have some kind of bravery, or some way of looking at things with a quantum leap mindset,
Yeah.
not a faster horse.
Hmm.
And so I think that shaped a lot of how I look at things today. And
Yeah.
looking at everything that's coming with AI as an example,
Yeah.
we're at the very early days of that. And
Right.
so it's really, it's almost difficult to look several steps ahead,
Mm.
from what's changing so rapidly now. But yeah, I would say that was always my mindset, is like category creation is really exciting.
Hmm.
And I think we've gotten better at doing that over the years. Um, and yeah, so documentation was one. I think what we've got upcoming with ScalePad, we've got the next category. I'm sure we'll dig into
Yeah.
what that is a little bit later, but
Right.
it's definitely the most exciting thing to do, is
Yeah.
where you're like profoundly making a change and an impact to an industry that's like always done something a certain way.
Yeah. That's so true. And especially for this industry, maybe not more than most, but this one's the only one that I know professionally too, where it's so easy to like fall victim to the patterns or only rise to the level of our own worldview when we're in it as an MSP.
Yeah.
And so it as an industry, it seems like it's always positioned to be, maybe not disrupted might not be the right word, but for new categories to come in. And at a time like right now, today, where to your point, AI is here, even though people think it's still coming, like AI is already here, and
Mm.
it's innovating at such a rate that time is literally collapsing on itself, on a
Yeah.
daily basis, essentially. That it makes me think also kind of like the where you came from question is, what was the most significant barrier that you had to overcome that most MSP tool providers, even still struggle with today?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting from the lens of, the like we spend a lot of time with startups,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think Joel, who works with me
Yeah.
on the top down side and actually runs that now, we are, is like wildly confused at sometimes, just with just how much innovation's happening.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's hard, I can't imagine being an MSP as well, and having to like sift through the different, pardon the pun,
Yeah.
the different options that are coming available.
Yeah.
We went to an event recently, and even just in the cybersecurity realm, it's like every every year there's like five new vendors in a category, and it's
Mm-hmm.
really hard to make heads or tails of that. I think the thing that stayed consistent is community.
Mm.
And one of the reasons that, uh, the playbook that I always had was getting in front of as many people as I could. I
Yeah.
think having authenticity is also super important. I think some of the best companies we've seen created are from folks that have been in the space and have and truly understand the nature of the problem set.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, getting a new idea in front of people at scale is
Mm.
always been hard. I mean, the playbook has always been, you got to go to 20 events, 50 events,
Yeah.
100 events. And that's pretty old school too, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
in a modern SaaS world, that's not how it's
Yeah.
typically done. So our
Right.
industry is really unique in that sense. Like if you don't have a physical presence where people are hanging out, you're probably
Hmm.
not going to, get much traction.
Yeah. An interesting piece that I think is beneath the surface also of what I heard you say. It's another area of our industry that has some scales over their eyes too, which is like the way that we've always done it is the way that the newcomers should come do it too, right? Or
Yeah.
it's just the only way to do it. And so much change has happened in the last 12, 18 months, and really even just like the last 6, where it's so dangerous. Well, my position would be it's so dangerous today to hold on to the belief that how it was done in the past is the best way, is the right way, or is the only way to do it.
Totally.
And
Yeah. Yeah, I think
yeah.
is one of the systemic issues that I've seen, and I think you guys are working to address this as well. And I think we've talked about it before.
Mm-hmm.
Is um, like who are we solving for?
Mm.
And I think the industry has been somewhat plagued by solving for the MSP
Yeah.
and the typical promise of software that I can make you more efficient or I can cut
Yeah.
down the number of hours it takes to do X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really basic value
Yeah.
props. I would say like
Mm-hmm.
that's what all software should do.
Yeah.
And so like we've been plagued by that approach, which is just that. And I think where I think the industry needs to pivot, which is obviously very relevant to our conversation and what you guys are doing,
Yeah.
is as a consumer of MSP services, as i.e. an SMB,
Mm-hmm.
representing 60% of the GDP,
Yeah.
what have we done to improve their consumption
Mm.
of technology and strategy and engagement with the MSP?
Yeah.
And all you got to do is look at the simple example of a ticket and say, is that the kind of experience as a consumer that is modern? Is
Yeah.
that how I would like to consume tech
Mm-hmm.
today, or engage with someone who's going to help me with my ask? And so I
Yeah.
think there's been a true lack of focus on the last mile
Yeah.
and making sure we deliver beautiful experiences to our customers as
Mm.
MSPs, and that they can kind of like celebrate that not everything is like a problem, and there's
Yeah.
there's actual magic moments to be had in
Yeah.
customer experience that I think we've just left. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, automate this and automate that, faster
Mm.
this, faster that, faster horse,
Yeah.
a nicer font. That's
Yeah.
not the answer.
Yeah.
It's like what is the customer experience and how do we improve their experience, because that's what
Mm.
makes lasting unbreakable partnerships.
Yeah. That's so well said, right? And what I observed in the 18 years at those 5 different MSPs was the moment as a team, as a leadership team, or as the line levels at the lowest level when I was one, when I could shift the focal point from anything inside our 4 walls, outside our 4 walls, into the seat of the person that I was there to serve,
Hmm.
was where we saw just asymmetrical upside of value returned, right? You couldn't get to the referrals fast enough, you couldn't onboard people quick enough, you couldn't turn down the free lunches or the food
Hmm.
that gets sent to the office. Like, to your point, I think it was about when the focus was truly on the experience of the people we were there to serve, was where everything else just sort of fell in line. And what's odd, maybe that's not the right word, but like what's hard to grasp about that reality is most MSPs started that way, right? Like they were
Yeah.
a little bit contrarian in that they maybe didn't want to work for someone else. They were good with IT. They were good with people. They sort of accidentally fell into owning a company as a result of being able to get people to come, take their service and stuff. But at some point they drift a little bit, maybe away from the core focus of like caring and
Hmm.
understanding and putting in a discretionary effort without an expectation of return. And I really like that, you know, you use the word experience more than once, even in a couple of sentences that um, I've actually never even, I haven't heard as it relates to MSP, someone describe it as like create beautiful experiences
Mm-hmm.
for the end user. Maybe you can tell me a little bit more about just how you think through that and see through that and ultimately deliver that.
Yeah, I think for me, it's like, I think exactly the way you articulated it is pretty accurate. Like, we've gone as MSPs scale, it's very easy to move towards a more of a transactional relationship
Mm-hmm.
and away from an experiential
Yeah.
relationship.
Yep.
And you see, that thing when, if you're a five-person MSP, it's much more of an experience
Yeah.
for, I've got the CEO's cell number and I can
Right.
text and we can ask, get things done really quickly with like full context of what's going on. And
Mm-hmm.
as you scale, it becomes more transactional. Next thing you know, we're talking about SLA and response time and resolution time,
Yeah.
and just by the nature of that, it feels like a transactional relationship. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think you're bang on. It's like, and that's one of the hardest things to scale is,
Yeah.
that human relationship
Mm-hmm.
at the last mile. And the types of questions you talk about the four walls
Yeah.
going in, and if you've been working at an MSP in a strategic role before, those questions come naturally. Like
Yeah.
I would ask at a medical facility, what does your patient intake process look like?
Mm.
And as opposed to are your backups good?
Yeah. Right.
And immediately paint yourself into a box as a service provider and a non-strategic partner.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, to the extent uh, that we can change that conversation back to customer value, I think is
Yeah.
the biggest thing that's missing. And honestly, we're kind of getting into it. What hasn't scaled with
Yeah.
with the entire industry? Like people
Mm-hmm.
are talking about QBRs and VCIO and account management and customer success almost
Yeah.
interchangeably,
Mm-hmm.
with almost no uh, real strategy
Mm-hmm.
to accomplish that at the last mile. And
Yeah.
there's folks doing it really well, and
Right.
there's folks doing it really well for some customers,
Yeah.
but there's almost nobody that's doing it really well for all customers.
Yeah.
And granted, the MSP business is hard. Like in
Mm-hmm.
SaaS, if I'm delivering a product to you and I've got one product and 1,000 customers,
Mm-hmm.
managing how you onboard, managing how you engage with the software,
Yeah.
managing a roadmap, like
Mm-hmm.
those are all things we can do, and it's much easier.
Mm-hmm.
In the MSP business, your conversation changes the minute you are
Yeah.
with a customer that has a different maturity or a
Mm-hmm.
different appetite for technology
Yeah.
or is in a different industry. Uh,
Right.
it's complicated. So it's like a recurring revenue business like SaaS,
Yep.
except it has none of the consistency of SaaS.
Yeah.
And the product is delivered by people for
Mm-hmm.
the most part. And
Mm-hmm.
people have a lot of variables. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
that's the tricky thing. And I think that's something as an industry we need to figure out how to solve. And we need
Mm.
to bring forward an approach that allows this medical client of this MSP to have a perfect experience,
Mm-hmm.
um, whether or not they're talking to the CEO or an account manager or the service desk. Those folks
Yeah.
have the context and they have the understanding of the business, and they can deliver that experience that people kind of expect now but aren't getting.
Yeah. Yeah. It really brings me kind of to one of my next thoughts and questions that I had for you, which is that you really, Chris, you bring this like completely unique approach to platform integration. Like,
Yeah.
what is the core framework that, and maybe that's not the right word, but we'll just go with this. Like, what's the core framework that makes your platform approach different from other vendors who have always really just focused on integrations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think strategically, we took on, so ScalePad specifically took on a little different strategy, and this
Mm-hmm.
is not in any way to throw shade at other companies in our space that have done tremendously well.
Sure.
The big four kind of
Yep.
players have done a phenomenal job, and they all
Hmm.
do it a little differently. But one of the things they seem to have in common, and this is, I think largely just due to the nature of the relationship with private equity,
Yeah.
is optimizing, making an acquisition, uh, doing a lot of cross sell, and really scaling those businesses impressively. First of all,
Hmm.
let's just call that what it is, like very
Yeah.
impressive growth and margins that these folks are able to deliver.
Hmm.
But the strategy isn't built on a platform strategy. And
Yeah.
for us, so we've in the last 3 years, we did 5 acquisitions at ScalePad, and the way we approached that problem was I think totally different. Like
Hmm.
we believe in integration at a core level.
Yeah.
And so the various products that we have, uh, call it being lazy. Like we don't want our products to have to, our different product managers to have to get together and
Mm.
kind of envision how they could have integrations between them.
Yeah.
What we said is, instead of that, why don't we put all products in the core, make
Yeah.
sure APIs for every product are exposed.
Hmm.
And as a result of that, individual product teams can actually uh, sort of autonomously figure out that like there's features in that product that would make a lot of sense in context in this workflow in another
Yeah.
product. And
Right.
so we basically remove all the shackles because it's one OS. We call that the ScalePad OS. It's one
Hmm.
set of APIs. It's if I want to know something to do with compliance and I'm in a customer success
Yeah.
workflow, that information appears in the right spot, and that otherwise would require those two products to get together and visualize something. Sort of similar to if I was a third party vendor, if we want to do an integration, we kind of have to like figure it out together.
Yeah.
Um, this model, platform first, means that those integrations are all native,
Right.
and folks can subscribe to the endpoints that make more sense for their
Hmm.
business. And so um, for us, like that was hard.
Yeah.
Like taking that approach,
Hmm.
that means we can't do an acquisition and then start cross sell
Yeah.
in a few months. We have to
Sure.
do like a year long project or more in some cases to bring that stuff together at the core. But
Mm.
the long term value is so much higher, and a
Yeah.
lot of what the fruits of that labor are going to become evident here in 2025 because we wrapped up most of that work at the end of last year. And so the innovation that we can deliver is going to be accelerating at a ridiculous rate.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really great way of describing like the fundamental difference in the mindset of how you do something like that. Like how are you building and ultimately what are you trying to solve for? I think it also illustrates the MSP DNA that can go into a product if it came from an MSP DNA. Because I
Yeah.
think, not think, I know from when I was in the buyer seat at an MSP for so long that the fundamental breakdown for almost every vendor was that their solution wasn't necessarily congruent with our workflow or our behaviors, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
adoption and enablement were the number one place where it always broke down, and every expectation from every vendor for the most part was like, well, you can just change how you do it to adopt to the platform. Well, the average MSP has what, like 18 tools in their stack probably.
Mm-hmm.
So if all 18 of those vendors take the position that, well, you can just change how you do it to work the way that we've built it, like you really can't end up with a congruent experience for the MSP, for the vendor, or ultimately the end client that we
Yeah.
serve. And so the inverse of that, in my awareness, or like the way I'm thinking about how you've done it, is by taking the extra time to understand, maybe it isn't through the enablement component of the MSP, but it's the outcome and the value that your tool, your system, your platform can provide,
Mm-hmm.
needs to kind of tear down all the walls, right? It can't be siloed data. It can't be multiple portals. It can't be insert any of the other frustrations there, which is
Exactly.
really a unique, like platform centric approach that probably still faces some sort of resistance, especially to your earlier point, like you're creating a category. So even a great platform strategy probably has faced some pushback at different times. what's the biggest objection that MSPs have when they're considering like a unified platform approach like you're building at ScalePad?
Yeah, usually I would say, our industry, I don't believe really has any true platform players now. So
Yeah.
I think that it's sort of like that
Mm,
blue ocean greenfield scenario. Like there's nothing to compare it to
sure.
because everybody wants to check the marketing checkbox that we're integrated.
Mm-hmm.
But when you kind of peel back the onion and look at like what does that integration actually mean? Like is it integrated or is it just like it's a
Yeah.
sync? It's a two-way sync or a one-way sync or whatever.
Right.
And I think when we think about platform, and this is some of the conversations I'm having right now as we get closer to our release of Lifecycle Manager X.
Mm-hmm.
An example of that is client setting client goals, like which should drive all behavior
Yeah.
for me as an MSP.
Mm-hmm.
Um, where are those goals defined? And what's the system of record for those goals? And
Mm.
by the way, there's no good answer for that today. Those goals exist in people's
Yep.
heads or
Tribal
maybe
knowledge.
in a
Yeah.
document somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but let's just say we've solved that. Like we have a
Mm-hmm.
system of record for goals,
Yeah.
and um, and all the large platform MSPs that I'm talking to, I'm being very clear with them. I don't want you to have to, you define the goals in Lifecycle Manager X, and we're the system of record for that information. But I have no expectation that you want to have to log in there to see it.
Mm.
And so, would it make sense if you're doing some sort of a compliance project or someone's doing a service ticket in your business
Mm-hmm.
that they have context as to what this customer's goals are? And
Yeah.
is it possible that where they need that context one of is not a
Mm.
product provided by ScalePad?
Yeah.
And it's like, so that's the mindset is like,
Mm-hmm.
we will have core information that's essential to that customer success journey, but
Yeah.
we don't believe that that information should require you to necessarily log in to a specific tool to get that info. And we believe that those types of details should be available anywhere you are, even if it's a competitive product of ours.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think,
Yeah.
unlike what we've seen in the industry as a whole, is like, open ecosystem. People were
Right.
talking about that 10 years ago. I think that narrative has somewhat um, diminished.
Yeah.
I think we see the opposite. We see a little bit of empire building going on, and
Mm-hmm.
we think we need to go completely polar opposite to that, in the sense
Yeah.
that, um, you know, if there's a better tool for a certain category of software, we want you to be able to use that, but we
Mm-hmm.
don't want you to feel like you have to switch everything to that,
Yeah.
because some of the information,
Mm-hmm.
is not portable.
Right. Yeah.
So it's
That's
a real different approach, right?
yeah, it's a fundamentally different approach because one of the other thoughts I had, again, trying to like pull out of my PTSD from being an MSP and like trying to make the right decision to a tool, which is going to be a 1 to 3 year commitment at a minimum. It's like
Hmm.
how the fear that I had as an MSP was, how do I overcome that fear of change or vendor lock in, which I think, at least, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the way I hear your answer there is by acknowledging it and addressing it and say, well, we don't want you to feel locked in when it's really just access to the context
Yeah,
and through the ScalePad ecosystem, even
exactly
if
right.
the context is going to be withdrawn or seen or viewed from a different platform tool or access, which that is a fundamentally different. You're right. Like traditionally speaking, it's very like tribalism at its best, right? Like
Yeah,
everything's in a container in a silo because that was their moat. I don't really know. But the most important part in the word that you used, which I picked up on, was context. Out of all my years in MSP, I can say, like stepping back, all of the true value that an MSP can deliver to their customer is collectively pooled in that. It's in the context,
yeah,
right? And the root fundamental issue was it's either visibility, measurability, or accountability. And oftentimes it was the visibility that was the problem, right? Like I don't know how to get the context that someone else has either in their head or in the system or in a different system or in a different tool.
yeah,
And yet if I was aware of it, I could preemptively use my spidey senses to go get out in front of the new CFO to tell them what our contract includes so that we don't end up with a churn client when they're trying to make their name made, right? Like there's all those little
Totally.
nuanced pieces of being an MSP where if you had the visibility, it's just kind of game changing, is
Yeah.
what I hear you say.
No, it's exactly right. And I think we're kind of honing in on this problem that I mentioned, which is customer success. It's like
Yeah.
we put so much effort into, you know, getting that contract signed,
Mm-hmm.
and then, most MSPs have a pretty reasonable
Yeah.
onboarding process, and largely focused around technology onboarding.
Sure.
And you're like, okay, so you signed the contract and then you did onboarding, and now what?
Yeah.
And usually when I ask that question, like, now what? They go, oh, well, we're gonna do a QBR. And I'm like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
What goes into that QBR? And it just, you play that out. You're like, okay, customer wants to add some new things. They're excited about something. Now what? Customer
Mm-hmm.
wants to churn. Now what? And so that those are all symptoms of a program not being in place
Mm.
for the right side of the bow tie, or the right side of the
Yeah.
funnel, or the bottom
Right.
post close funnel.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's like a big problem in our space, because we haven't operationalized uh, the management of customer success at scale.
Mm.
We haven't contemplated things like segmentation,
Right.
maturity, appetite.
Mm-hmm.
How do I handle a small mature customer
Yeah.
versus a large immature customer? What if their appetites for technology are low versus high in either case?
Mm-hmm.
And so it hasn't been operationalized. There hasn't been a way to strategize and actually democratize the approach to make it a team
Yeah.
vibe.
Right.
People have been chasing I mean, I've seen some of these unhinged LinkedIn posts on, what is a VCIO? And
Right.
literally just post what is a VCIO on LinkedIn today, and you probably get one of the busiest posts
Yeah.
ever, because it's just
Right.
like,
It just is the
nobody
thing.
knows what that is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
And you are
that's,
so
yeah, it's one of
you're
those
so
things.
right. It's like if we think about MSP as an industry and throw it back into history where we can contextualize it correctly and we actually look at it as a craft, right? And craftsmanship, and you think about the ability to build and train and transfer the domain expertise about like the if it's social contract, if it's emotional intelligence, if it's just understanding because you've seen it 100 times before, if it's when this thing happens then we need to go do these things to prevent that. There's just so much nuance
Yeah.
to the instinct that you get inside the industry that I think really is ultimately one of the things I'm hearing you say is like, well, part of that is the symptom of not having a platform in this case to one harvest or harness any of that context. And then the other side to that, which I really agree, is leaning into the ability to operationalize it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, how many times at any MSP's experience is like you get pulled into some situation just to go figure out that you could have known about it if you
Yeah.
happen to be in the right silo, but because you're not, you're reacting to a situation that didn't have to be one. We used to call it in one of my MSPs just no preventable outages, right? And that didn't
Yeah.
just mean technology failures. It was like, don't ask questions we should already know the answer to. Don't,
Mm.
infer something, ask. Like a lot of those
Yeah.
customer service, customer experience components that we would rob from the hospitality industry,
Mm.
actually, right? Like at
Yeah.
one of the other MSPs, we brought in one of the consulting groups. I always forget its name. I think it was DeJulius that trained the Ritz Carlton, or at least took the Ritz Carlton's approach and like trained other service based businesses to see themselves through a hospitality lens and not a service lens.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's just a totally different world
Yeah, it's
for
interesting
most.
too. Like you kind of touched on, there's no platform to support it, and that's certainly, I think, one of the three things that's absent, and obviously one of the areas that we feel we can help.
Yeah.
That you do have that technology underlying piece that's absolutely absent for running a
Hmm.
program like this. I
Yeah.
think the other two things that are obvious as well is there's really a lack of methodology. You talk about
Mm.
Ritz Carlton and how they approach uh,
Yeah.
how they approach customer experience. there is a methodology that's defined behind
Hmm.
it. There are principles, there
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
workflows, there are strategies, there's,
Hmm.
everything that is defined as far as like what every role is responsible for.
Yep.
How do we handle front of house, back of house, like every
Yeah.
aspect of that. So
Hmm.
that methodology is largely missing. Like
Right.
people are just figuring it out as best they can, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
opinions. And you go to one of these events, and everybody's doing it a little bit differently. So
Yeah.
that's a piece that needs to be fixed in
Hmm.
addition to the platform and product.
Hmm.
The other part is just straight up, and again, very applicable to something like Ritz Carlton, is the education and training.
Yeah.
And it's great to have a methodology, and
Hmm.
it's great to have that, we have a clear understanding of what the customer journey should look like at every stage. So
Right.
that's great. That's defined.
Yeah.
Then we have a product that can handle, technically running that program.
Hmm.
But now we have to make sure our people are able to execute on the methodology using the product.
Right.
And so like all three of those things kind of have to be in alignment
Hmm.
for the program to be successful.
Yeah.
And
That's
so
so true. And
yeah, so it's kind of like, I think what it is to me is it's sort of undercooked. Like
yeah.
we underestimated what it takes to do this at scale. And
Hmm.
so, obviously I'm pretty passionate about like, let's fix this thing, just like we
Sure.
did for documentation. Let's fix this thing so everybody's
Yeah.
clear, customers are aligned to a journey that we want for them, and we
Hmm.
know how to handle conversations, and it doesn't require, John or Susan that
Yeah.
has that context. It's
Hmm.
a system.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good and so true and so simple in design. Now you just have to take it from there, right, and unpack it and build it out. But
Mhm.
those are three really great core components of what it takes to be in the people business, which is what we're in. I think oftentimes as MSPs and tech heads and nerds or whatever label you want to put on it, like we misconstrue the industry that we truly are in, right? We think of ourselves maybe as tech companies, but in reality, we truly are a service company or a hospitality company,
Yeah.
and our customers deserve better, and the industry deserves better. And yet, it's again back to mindset, which you described earlier too. When we think now about really like the future of where things are going, right? And so if we look now at just the future of MSP technology platforms,
Hmm.
you have a really unique vantage point for the industry and from the industry. What platform innovations are coming by 2026, let's say, that most MSPs aren't prepared for?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think obviously I'm so deep in this customer success journey right now. I
Hmm.
think that's going to pave the way for a lot of what needs to happen. We need
Yeah.
to programify
Hmm.
this approach. I think whatever, the classic two-word phrase trusted advisor
Hmm.
is still elusive.
Yeah.
And I think the platforms that assist with elevating conversations into the more strategic and more business level conversations
Yeah.
are really the next chasm to cross.
Hmm.
Getting away from the more basic um, MSP 1.0
Sure.
conversations, service delivery, getting away from eventually elevating beyond disaster recovery and business continuity,
Hmm.
really focusing on aspects that can transform
Yeah.
a client's business or
Hmm.
modernize a client's business or really allow them to innovate.
Yep.
um, so I think, if at 30,000 foot view, it's like which things can enable SMBs to innovate
Mm.
as partners with MSPs. What are
Yeah.
those opportunities that exist? There's incredible stuff going on. Obviously, um, AI for operational efficiency and
Yeah.
context is incredible. Has
Hmm.
tremendous value to MSPs directly,
Yeah.
just in terms of increasing the level of professionalism,
Hmm.
having that context and making things better for the customer. I
Right.
think the bigger opportunity though is like, how do we bring those things
Mm.
out
Yeah.
beyond? How do we bring
extend
those
it
things into the
through.
boardroom at the
Yeah,
last mile?
absolutely. Yeah, you
So like,
touched on that at the opening where it's like MSPs have the opportunity. I just back up and say, like, that's our belief at
mhm,
SIFT. The thesis is that MSPs have the opportunity to repair their relationship with the market, whereas the market, the SMB market, has stepped aside from the MSP conduit to go figure out how and what do I do with AI? Like, I'm just
mhm,
going to go straight to OpenAI, I'm going to go straight to Anthropic, I'm going to go straight to Grok, whatever one it is. They're moving to either big tech or to consumer
mhm,
to figure out and try to solve for a problem that they know exists, although they haven't quite identified it yet. And so for the first time ever, they've decoupled the path with the MSP as like that trusted advisor, right? Because they're kind of doing it on their own. And at the same time, on the other side, you have MSPs that are doing what MSPs tend to do with new technology, which is sit on their heels slightly, allowing someone else to take all the bullets or arrows
mhm,
enough to like prove out the model and prove out the future of the thing. And then they can move in, eliminate some of that initial pain, and just get straight down to, providing the solution. And
mhm,
so the huge opportunity is for MSPs to look at it differently and say, well, what if instead we actively stepped up and chose to kind of like take the first step into the unknown? But guess what? No one else knows either. We're all living in the exact same time with the exact same technological revolution happening in the exact same moment. So it really isn't that challenging or that hard to be seen as a leader in that space, because
no,
you really just have to like try using it for the most part at this point to be any better than the masses. And instead lean into that uncomfortable conversation and say, look, we're all figuring it out together, but we
mhm,
know that there are some things inside the way that old tech works that is really ripe for value extraction
mhm,
using new tech like AI.
mhm.
And that kind of brings me to like the maybe the deepest part of the pyramid, or iceberg, is data, right? Like, where do you see the biggest data opportunities that integrated platforms will unlock for MSPs in the AI first age?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think so. One of the things that comes to mind, which is really interesting and I think really relevant for AI,
Mm-hmm.
is, and this is an approximate number, but let's just say that I think it's around 8% of an SMB spend is with an MSP, and something to the tune of 75% of an SMB spend is on labor.
Mm.
And so where I see the biggest opportunity in data is helping to optimize that 75%,
Yeah.
and something that MSPs have not been able to capture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So whatever an SMB spends with me as an MSP could be a fraction of what they might spend with me if I can help them with that problem.
Right.
If I can help them scale the business with less people, or
Mm-hmm.
I can, help them. Yeah, basic. That's probably the biggest outcome. I can help them scale their business with less people.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're actually having a true valuable conversation, and
Right.
that's where I see that last mile data is very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of startups that have popped up. One, full disclosure, that we invested in, called Produce 8, and that's an example of that,
Mm-hmm.
where it's, workforce analytics. So looking
Yeah.
at what, that 75% cost, that's in the SMB, like,
Yeah.
how effective is that? Are there functions that could make that
Mm-hmm.
60%,
Yeah.
or enable the MSP to stick with the current cost structure and scale by 50%?
Right.
Those, I think, are huge opportunities. I think MSPs are really equipped to assist with that,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Um, it's not HR. It's literally like, what can, like, and again, still down the AI rabbit hole, but like,
Mm-hmm.
what can AI do to supplement or augment,
Yeah.
what the SMB is doing? I think there's just like hundreds of opportunities there.
Yeah. Staying on that for just a second, the AI side, like, how are AI advancements changing your vision for what MSP platforms can achieve?
Yeah. So my perspective on AI is really interesting. We have so many incredible use cases
Mm-hmm.
that are being worked on now, launching soon, et cetera. A
Yeah.
lot of things with generative AI that just make a ton of sense, like the way that we interact with in our daily lives with GPT and Grok and
Hmm.
everything else.
Yeah.
Those use cases are pretty obvious, and I think
Hmm.
we're starting to see those roll out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
The one that I think is more complicated is what you use the word, and I use the word context,
Mm.
um, and that is the AI use case, with true machine learning
Yeah.
and true understanding and memory
Hmm.
and things that are not largely being tackled by most of the platform players today, where
Yeah.
we see big opportunity.
Mm.
So, I think having context APIs available where we can literally understand what's going on right now in that
Mm.
business specific to this situation.
Yeah.
Um, those are, I think, longer tail AI use cases that
Sure.
people are going to have to work on for a long time
Yeah.
to get it right. But
Yep.
I think probably the most exciting part, right? We're
Hmm.
sitting on enormous amounts of data, and we're sitting on a bunch of context records that could provide context but
Yeah.
don't.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's hard, right? Like,
Hmm.
should the PSA do that? Should maybe can they
Hmm.
do that? I don't know.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think there's going to be still a lot of tech to come out in that area,
Hmm.
in my opinion, and
Yeah.
it's difficult, but going to be
Yeah.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It is fun. We see that challenge as where the opportunity is moving as well, and then you add the extra layer. Like what's just as important in context is how we as humans interact, right? Which in most cases, it's also what makes us separate from other mammals. Is like we can communicate verbally. We have language,
Hmm.
natural language. We have comprehension and understanding. So to be able to bring all of those things together, language, interacting with technology in a natural way, and then you have context, the opportunity to be able to speak to technology the same way you would that junior tech that you just brought on board. Like, how do you train them? Most MSPs, it's like, come sit in the seat next to me. Anytime you have a question, lean over, shoulder to shoulder and ask.
Yeah.
It's not ideal, but it's the reality of the way most of it's done. You touched on training and enablement earlier. And the secret there, or even the tribal knowledge stuff, right? Like the real value stuck in the
Hmm.
context is in nuanced language. And so as these technologies evolve, the ability to truly unlock, infinite coworkers, so to speak, using AI, data, context, language is really the part that the world just hasn't quite seen, but we'll probably go straight to that statistic that you talked about,
Yeah.
where 70% of the cost is still sitting there, in what David Powell coined or said, what's he called? The butter passing jobs is how he described it,
Hmm.
right? Like just
Yeah.
moving something from here to there, um,
Yeah.
is
I
just
think
so much opportunity.
the other really interesting one, which is, it's one thing to have the context and be able to have the conversation and sort of augment what we can do
Hmm.
as humans, but I think the one that's also hard is the agentic actions that can be taken, and I
Yep.
think that's also going to be long and difficult, to
Hmm.
be able to trust that an agent can actually, not only understand what's being asked, but then actually go ahead and take some actions that are going to complete
Hmm.
that requirement
Right.
uh, autonomously. And I think it's going to be some time before we can uh, have those actions available first, like even available to
Hmm.
the AI.
Yeah.
But even once it's available, it'll be sometime even further until we trust
Yeah.
those agents to
Yeah.
actually take the actions as well. So I
Right.
do feel like it definitely feels like an arms race right now. I
Hmm.
mean, as you mentioned, I think at the opening, is it's just something new every day. There's like something that was hot a month ago is now obsolete.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think we'll get there, but at the same time, I think it's also going to take some time before the everything matures
Hmm.
and we get a level of comfort that we can enable some sort of autonomy. Because I mean, honestly, if you could interact with an agent and you had and that agent could solve your problems faster and very accurately,
Hmm.
like you'd be happy to do that.
Right.
But until that's true,
Hmm.
then
Yeah.
not so much, right?
Right. Yeah. And we'll have that initial learning curve component too, where when it makes its first mistake, right, that like
Hmm.
the divot it creates in the trust, even though we wouldn't have that same punitive perception about
Hmm.
the coworker who just started and we didn't tell them. Right. So it's just like
Totally.
going back to the category creation. It's just, it really is reshaping how everyone needs to think in this
Hmm.
world as we move forward, because it's fundamentally changed the way we can think, but also the way that the thinking interacts with the process to get to the outcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. As we finish our conversation today, what is the one action that you hope MSP owners will take immediately after hearing this conversation?
Oh, it's a great question. I think the one action I would say is um, maybe a self assessment of the customer experience.
Yeah.
It doesn't even need to be self. It could be self or actually uphold. I think sometimes we don't want the answer, but I think
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty easy to go out and just say, "Listen, is my customer getting what I would expect as a customer of me?"
Mm.
And I think it's a great thing to consider as we scale and develop
Yeah.
programs and make investments. And I think yeah, look, put the customer lens on. I guess it sounds kind of like obvious, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I don't know if that's, it's sometimes we're stuck in the business or stuck in the bottle,
Yeah.
can't read the label. And I think
Yeah.
that there's really gold in those hills there.
Yeah. Absolutely. Chris, if people have enjoyed some of the light bulbs that you've turned on for them today in the conversation, where's the best place for them to reach out to learn more?
I would say find me on LinkedIn,
Okay.
Chris Day, ScalePad. Add me on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to set up a call and discuss. I'm probably 60-70% of my week is externally focused now, so love those meetings.
Yeah. Awesome. And then you get the opportunity to, I usually say ruin the next guest's day, but leave a question behind for them. So if you had one
Hmm.
question that you could leave behind for the next guest of the show that they have to answer, what would that question be?
Well, I'm gonna keep it on brand here, and I'm gonna say, um, describe to me what customer success means to you
Hmm.
if you're an MSP.
Yeah. And even if you're not, you're going to have to answer it as a vendor too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
What does customer success mean and look like to you?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you again for coming on the show today. Thank you for the conversation and the insights, and thank you to the audience for tuning in to another episode of MSP Insider.